أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين الميامين المنتجبين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله يبدأ الخلق ثم يعيده ثم إليه ترجعون صلوات على محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Tonight is our 9th discussion on Al-Mabda wal-Ma'ad, the origin and the return. And up until this point, we have discussed the idea of spiritual wayfaring or coming from Allah and returning to Him from an individual perspective. Tonight, in the first part of our discussion, we want to talk about this entire concept from a communal and social aspect. We all know that man is a social creature and that for the most part our day-to-day needs are only met when we are part of a community, when we are part of a society, and that it is not possible for at least most of us to live in isolation. When we live in a society, it implies then that there are certain rules and regulations that we must abide by. And these rules and regulations then influence how we live our lives, and also the fact then that most of our actions are then done alongside the actions of others. And therefore, it is not just our individual behavior which will determine how we journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or any spiritual journey we undertake, but it is also our behavior as a community, as a society, as a nation, and ultimately as a species that is altogether determining this. How we influence society and how society influences us. And in particular, for those individuals who are religious or who have an interest in spirituality, and bihamdillah, many of us here do the best we can to practice our faith, we already know that society influences our thoughts, our actions, our words, our values, and ultimately our worldview. It is for this reason that consciously or subconsciously, we make a lot of decisions based on where we want to live and which society we want to associate ourselves with, isn't it? There are many beautiful small towns and villages all over North America that we hear of or that we come across when we go on a holiday, and we think, subhanallah, this would have been such a wonderful place to retire or to live. But we don't. Why? Because we think there's no community here. There is a community, but there is no community that shares our values. That is the issue for us, isn't it? We think there is no masjid here. We have children, there is no madrasa here. So all these things come into play. Why? Why do we worry about, are there Muslims living in this place? Are the Shias, for example, living in this place? Is there a mosque here? How large? That is one of the first questions you would ask if you want to migrate somewhere. How large is the community there? Will there be a madrasa? Is there a masjid? Is there a mosque? What kind of a community? Because we understand that we need to be part of a group in order to be able to live in a certain manner and adopt certain values. And oftentimes when we live in a society that is predominantly godless or materialistic, it requires us to swim against the tide. It requires us to move against what society in general is doing. And therefore, whenever we think of matters related to the hereafter and we think of matters related to spirituality, it becomes important for us, especially those of us who are in a position of authority, who take on positions of leadership, who volunteer in communities, who get involved in the madrasa, who establish schools, who take basically a role in which they are going to influence the current and the future generation to come in our society and a community. They need to consider this fact that, what sort of a society do we want and what sort of a framework do we want to work within, so that all these matters that we're talking about, journeying to Allah, spirituality, spiritual practice, finding Allah, submitting the self-will and surrendering it to God, how do we do that not just for myself, but for my family, and then my society, my community? And what we shall see, shortly, is that this is important not just out of selflessness or compassion for others, that I shouldn't just want to excel myself, but I should want my community to excel. But actually, I cannot excel or progress unless the community and society with me also progresses and excels. This is subliminal within us, that whatever I believe to be the way for my salvation or higher spiritual acquisition, I need the support, the validation, and the agreement of others, because I'm a social being. This may somehow play into why, for example, I'm speaking to you about this subject. I could have read this and just kept it to myself and just wondered, is this true or not? And I'm going to try it and practice it. But there is a natural urge within me to share it with you. In the same manner, when you come across something that you find is of spiritual value, you will find it is natural within you to want to share that with others. Whether you write a book, whether you teach in the madrasa, whether you lecture, whether you talk to a friend, whether you discuss, or whether you introduce policies and procedures and rules and regulations into your community and society that encourages towards the spirituality. Because you cannot do it alone. You need society to be able to do that. A secular society or a materialistic society insists that religion and politics need to stay separate. The state and the church must always stay separate. Why? Because in their understanding, if you bring religion into governance, into society, then it violates the individual's rights. It opposes democracy. Faith should be something private, should be something individual. It should not be part of society. And it is for this reason we find ourselves today, for example, living in a society that on one hand is humane, cares for others, looks after its citizen, is very generous in helping others who are unfortunate, and so on. But on the other hand, they do not see a connection between governance and social rules and how it affects men's reality or what happens after death. That is completely ignored. Is there life after death? Is there a God? Are we answerable to this God? The rules that we make, does it matter what He has to say in the rules that we make and how we govern ourselves? That is completely sidelined, ignored, not acknowledged, and absent in society. And because generations and generations have been taught this idea that faith is personal, faith is private, it is not something that we should discuss in public, you will find that the majority, even if they believe in something or have faith in something, when a new legislation is passed, if it opposes their faith, they do not stand up and vote against it. Because they have been trained for generations that it violates the individual's right. And your faith has no role to play in how society is governed. So the majority of people living in Canada, for example, might believe in God and might have a religion and a faith. But if a new law is passed or introduced, a few minority who want to hold and bring that law into society, which is against all major religions or all faiths, will fight for it. And they win and they get that passed because it's only their voice that is heard. The majority don't want to vote for or against it because they have been trained for generations that this is. They in fact don't see a connection between faith and religion and government and politics and society and how we conduct ourselves, because that has been removed from their understanding completely. We do not see especially the things that do not harm us physically. So for example, if it's an issue of hijab, if it's an issue of whether alcohol should be permitted in society or not, should gambling be permitted or not, should obscenities and things that are shameful and immoral on our magazines, on our websites, on whatever, should that be allowed in public? Well, that doesn't really matter. That's personal, that's private. That's something you discuss with your priest in church or with your imam in the mosque. Outside, we live a life of duality. It is only when it harms us physically, then we vote against it. It just so happens that by coincidence, religion agrees with that. So if it is, for example, drug abuse, if it is child abuse, then we'll vote against it, we'll speak out against it, we'll introduce laws where those who commit such wrongdoings, we punish them for it, because it harms us materially as a secular society, not because of any religious value. So it is only when it harms us physically that we are concerned about it. A secular society essentially suggests that God has no plan for society, that God has left it to men to decide how to govern himself, and that God is only interested in the individual. He's not interested in you as a community. And your relationship with God is not as a nation or as a community, it is just one-on-one. This is basically the idea that is drummed into people who are religious as a whole. So, society is left for men. And it is for this reason that if you observe carefully, you will see that societies that are secular, listen to this very carefully, societies that are secular, the religion that is dominant in such a religion adores and promotes monasticism, because it ties into this idea that faith is personal and is private. So when you want to find God, you retire in a room, or you retire in a cave, or you cut yourself away from society and you find God in that manner. Because God only cares to deal with you as individuals. And of course there is some merit to this idea of withdrawing from society in some manner and not being overindulgent and having a simple life, because that allows you the time and the space to meditate, to reflect. But simply simple life and cutting yourself away from society and living on your own doesn't mean you will find God. Otherwise, everyone who is homeless should have been enlightened, isn't it? That would have been the natural conclusion to that. Islam has the complete opposite opinion. Islam first sees you as an individual, but it sees your success only when you strive for spiritual perfection as a community, as a society. And that is why Islam is severely opposed to monasticism. La rahbaniyatu fil Islam, said Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. There is no monasticism in Islam. It discourages you from doing that. It asks you to get involved. This is the whole principle of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar. What does Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar mean? In layman's terms, it means you cannot mind your own business. You need to speak up when you have to. This was the mission of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, isn't it? When he rose, he said, I am rising to do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar because I am seeing corruption spreading in society. And that is why we have in Hadith that if a community does not get involved when the society is becoming corrupt, then Allah will appoint leaders for that society and community who will be tyrannical, who will oppress that nation. And when that happens, that society will call out to God for help, but He will not help them. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah does not change the state or condition of a community until they themselves change it first. They take the initial step. If you study the history of every tyrant, from Idi Amin in Uganda, to Saddam, to Hosni Mubarak, to Gaddafi, to even Yazid, you will find the only way they came to power is because as they began rising, the people kept quiet. It's not my business. If I'm interested in God, it's my personal individual striving for God. If anything, I want people to praise me how religious I am so that I feel even better and I strive more. But as long as I'm going to reach a very high spiritual level and become enlightened and reach God, the rest of you can go to hell if you don't mind, because I really don't care. This is how societies become corrupt. And such individuals then do not find enlightenment. It is only when they become selfless and they care as much about community as they care about their own growth, and they want to take everyone with them, that it is not personal, but it is communal. You may have heard the saying that says, for evil to spread, all that is required is for the good to do nothing. If the good people just sit back and do nothing, that is all that is needed for evil to spread. So the good have to constantly be involved, taking positions of leadership, providing that vision to the community as to what is it we want to go, so that lesser qualified or people whose motives are wrong do not take on this position. Now, what is beautiful is that when the Quran speaks of ma'ad or resurrection, in many verses in the Quran it speaks of the individual's resurrection, but in some places it speaks of the nation's resurrection as a whole. For example, in Surah Al-Jathiyah, which is chapter 45 of the Quran, verse 28 and 29, Allah says, now He's talking about the Day of Judgment. وَتَرَى كُلَّ أُمَّةٍ جَاثِيَةٍ. On that day you will see every nation falling on its knees. All will be kneeling before God. كُلُّ أُمَّةٍ تُدْعَى إِلَى كِتَابِهَا. Every nation will be summoned to its book. الْيَوْمَ تُجْزَوْنَ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. O nation, this day you will be requited, you will be paid back for what you did. هَذَا كِتَابُنَا يَنْتِقُ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْحَقِّ. This is our book. It will speak with the truth on this day. إِنَّ كُنَّا نَسْتَنْسِخُ مَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. We were recording everything that you were doing as a nation, as a community. We begin to see here that besides our individual book, quote-unquote book, that you see the Quran talking about all the time, that whoever is given his book in his right hand, then he shall be of the felicitous ones, and whoever is given his book in his left hand. In addition to your individual book, there is a community or a nation's book that is also presented to us. And that is why also when Allah speaks of resurrection, He doesn't talk about individuals being resurrected haphazardly. He says, يَوْمَ نَدْعُو كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. On that day we shall summon every nation with their leaders, with their imams. So there are imams who are righteous, and the Quran says there are imams who summon you to the fire of hell. The imam is called. Some of the traditionists and ulama, the way they explain it is that the leaders will be called, and when the leaders are called, the followers will automatically be pulled along with them. They will gravitate towards them. They will be just bundled and pushed along with them, that you are part of this man. He was your leader, you looked up to him. So we can take this from the perspective of our family, then we can take it from the perspective of our community, as a Muslim community, as our nation, as society, as country, and so on and so forth. And it is for this reason you will find that in Islam as well, because it gives this importance that your spiritual striving has to be as a nation, not just as an individual. That is why you will find that most acts of worship, Islam gives greater value when it is done as a community rather than individually. Look at, for example, everything we've been talking about, God consciousness, meditation, reflection. It's not, difficult to see that it's a lot easier to meditate and reflect and devote yourselves to Allah with full consciousness if you pray alone than if you pray in jama'ah, isn't it? Because you can pray privately at home, quietly in a corner, have a nice small cave where you just, worship Allah. But there is more reward in coming to the mosque and praying as a community and society where there is distraction. Why? Because Allah wants you to grow together, not individually. Look at Hajj. A lot of people who have never been for Hajj, they have this dream, when I go for Hajj, I'll be completely just me and my Lord going around the Kaaba, doing tasbih, and right? And those who've gone for Hajj are just having a good laugh. Because here you are, people elbowing you, pushing you, stepping on you, you're watching for, those people from the Far East, whose country I won't mention, with umbrellas trying to poke you into the eye, and you're trying to keep away, and right? And I've had people come back from Hajj and say, it was a disaster. I couldn't think of Allah even once. I was just trying to save my life during the entire tawaf. The whole tawaf, I was just trying to save my life. Allah throws you into that situation because the kamal is to find Allah in that chaos. There is no kamal in sitting on a mountain and worshipping Allah. You know, the example that my uncle, Marhum Mullah Asghar, used to give, he used to say that, you know, somebody bossed to the other and say, it's been 40 years and I've never had a traffic ticket. And people admire him. Amazing, 40 years, never traffic ticket? Impossible, how? So I don't have a driver's license. There is no kamal in that. Kamal is you drive 40 years and then don't get a ticket. So sitting at the top of a mountain and meditating and saying, I found Allah, mashallah, there is no kamal. Kamal is live in society, come to the mosque, do amr bil ma'roof, get involved in situations where there is conflict potentially. Get married, have children, live with family. And then conduct yourself with integrity, with righteousness. Then that is kamal. That is greatness. Because you have been through the fire and you have emerged as gold. Zakat is a social activity. Allah says to the Prophet, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُزَكِّيهِمْ. Take from their wealth charity so that you may purify them. It's a purifying act. And the opposite as well, if you think about it carefully, most of the muharramat, most of the things that is forbidden to us are forbidden because they harm society, not they harm you individually or harm or affect Allah's glory in any way. Think about it. Immorality. They affect society, they break up families. Alcohol, murder, breaking ties with family, qata'ur raham, backbiting, cheating, stealing. Think of anything that you know to be haram, you will see the problem with it that Islam has is because you are harming society, you are harming community. And therefore, it is important for us to think about this and to realize that we have no choice but to think of spiritual growth as a society, as a community. That how are we going to grow together as a community? If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa alihi. Another salawat ala Muhammad. Now I want to change over to a different subject or subtopic within our discussion completely. It is because of the lack of time and I'm trying to complete everything by tomorrow night, inshallah, so I can make a conclusion on the final night. So this part that I've talked about was the first half, where I wanted to talk about this importance that when we're talking of spirituality, let's not just think about it individually, but let's just think as well that how can we help each other and grow together, inshallah, as a society and a community. The other aspect to this whole discussion that I have sort of left with loose ends that I want to tie up is the issue of tawheed and shirk. A major part of our discussion in all these nine nights has been about tawheed, about God, about His unicity, about God being the only reality from which everything else manifests itself, and that our heedlessness, our unconsciousness, our inability to see reality, our preoccupation with the material world, our lack of spiritual growth is largely because of not acknowledging tawheed. This has already planted the seeds in our minds as to why Islam has such a great problem with shirk or polytheism, or the opposite of tawheed. And we know, for example, in Surah An-Nisa, verse 48 as well as verse 116, Allah says this twice, that إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ. Allah does not forgive that anything should be associated with Him. And He forgives everything else besides that, لِمَن يَشَاءُ, for whomsoever He pleases. And this is of course applicable to someone who knows Tawheed, who still adopts shirk, and who dies without repentance. It does not apply to one who is a mushrik and then repents, or someone who dies a mushrik but has never been introduced to Tawheed. Now, we know that God, of course, is not touched by man's ignorance. So we need to talk about this a little bit. Why is this such a big deal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That He would state this so candidly in the Quran, that Allah will forgive anything, but He will not forgive that anything should be associated with Him. The reason is because the entire purpose of man's existence is lost once you start acknowledging anything else besides Allah as your God. Whether that God is an idol that you bow yourself before, or whether it is something intangible, an idol in the heart that you worship or adore as you should adore and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If the source itself is lost and the origin is forgotten, then essentially we go through life just spinning our wheels, running after this, running after that, looking for happiness here, looking for happiness there, but we essentially do not find the purpose of our existence. And this is the meaning of all those verses of Quran that say that the only religion with God is Islam. Inna ad-deena inda Allahil Islam. Or for example, وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِ غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ وَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Whoever seeks any religion other than Islam, it will never be accepted from him. And on the Day of Judgment, he will be one of the losers. All these verses are essentially saying that there is no other reality except God. And Islam, whose meaning is surrender to God, is the same Islam that Adam preached and Nuh preached and Moses preached and Jesus preached and Abraham preached. It's the same submission to God. So God has only one path because there is only one reality, and the removal of everything besides Him that distracts you from Him and submitting to that one reality is what Islam is. If you choose any path other than this path of submission, then there is no other way to get to God. And that is why there is this insistence that Islam is the only religion. It is not meant in the sense of you have to perform this set of rituals, and if you don't, then you're going to hell. It is to say that if you refuse the idea that there is only one reality besides whom there is no other God, and that you surrender to this reality, then you are not going to be able to find any other way to get to the truth or reality. And this is made even more clearer in a verse that says, أَفَغَيْرَ دِينَ اللَّهِ يَبْغُونَ وَلَهُ أَسْلَمَ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Do they seek any other religion? Do they seek any other path except the religion of God, when everything in the heavens and the earth submit themselves to Him? طَوْعًا أَوْ كَرْهًا, willingly or unwillingly. وَإِلَيْهِ يُرْجَعُونَ, and to Him are all things in the process of returning. So the fact that Allah associates these two things, are they seeking anything else other than the deen of Allah? And He combines this with where the heavens and the earth surrender and submit themselves to God. We are then able to put these two together and say that the deen of Allah is the surrender to Him, just like as everything else in the heavens and the earth surrender to Him. And therefore that is the Islam that we are doing this. And it is for this reason then that you find Islam takes this unique position to say that righteous deeds are good, but faith is more important. If your faith is not right, then your good deeds will not take you forward. Because when all is said and done, what counts is what you have come to understand about God. Your good actions are simply meant to help you rise to higher levels of awareness. But the main thing that you're presenting, the engine itself, is your iman. The righteous actions are simply the fuel that run that engine. And a lot of times, and I've mentioned this before, we raise objections or we draw comparisons and say, well, look at so and so, they're atheists or they're not Muslims, but they do so much philanthropy and they donate so much, and look at what we do, and so on and so forth. It's not about the actions you do. Why does Allah says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَتَقَبَّلُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ? Allah only accepts from those who are God conscious. It is because faith is primary. There was a companion of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, who wept before the Imam and said, Yabna Rasulullah, I look at people around me and they have so much good that they're doing. And I love your path, the path of Ahlul Bayt. I have the right Iman, bihamdillah, but my actions are so few. I cannot fast mustahab fast, I cannot pray Salatul Layl, I'm not able to do all this, I'm not a rich man, I cannot give charity. The Imam said, don't say that. That is not how you are valued. They have a lot of good deeds, but when the doors of committing sins are open to them, they simply rush in without thinking. You don't have a lot of good deeds, but you stop, you have taqwa, you think before you do wrong. That is more precious to God. The sin that displeases you has greater value to God than the good deed that makes you proud and arrogant. And that is why in Surah Fatir, which is chapter 35 of the Quran, verse 10, Allah says, إِلَيْهِ يَسْعَدُ الْكَلِمُ الطَّيِّبُ. To Him ascends the good word, which is your faith. وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحِ يَرْفَعُهُ. And the righteous action simply lifts that good word up. Now, يَرْفَعُهُ can have two meanings. It can be referring to the good actions, or it can be referring to God. So you can translate the verse to mean, to God ascends the good word. As for the righteous action, it is God who lifts it up. Meaning the right faith simply naturally floats and gravitates towards higher spiritual realms. As for your good deeds, it is God who gives it value and lifts it up. The other meaning of it is, to Him ascends your faith, your good word, and your righteous actions lift it up. So when you're going out doing good work, volunteering, helping the community, being charitable, doing all this good work, that is very nice. You have produced a lot of fuel. But now what is it that you're sending up? That is your faith, that is your understanding of God, that is your tawheed, that is your aqidah, that is your usuluddin that you base your life and your worldview upon. So submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then takes me back to the state that Adam alayhi salam was before he ate from the tree that we talked about yesterday. The only difference is that now it doesn't just return you to a childlike or a newborn's state of purity. It brings you to a state of purity and God consciousness, but with a consciousness of who your Creator is and how you are connected to Him. The problem, we keep saying that the egoic self is the problem, the false sense of I is the problem, the self-identification is the problem. The problem with I, or with the egoic self, is that the moment I'm thinking in terms of I, as opposed to surrendering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I start looking and observing at things that are others besides Allah. That is what we said about Adam yesterday, isn't it, alayhi salam? That when he turned away and looked at the beauty of the world, he became unconscious of God, and that gave shaitan access to him to tempt him to eat from the tree of self-awareness. So this problem that as soon as I look away, as soon as I'm no longer without that state of surrender where I'm completely conscious of God and I start focusing on I also start looking at other things, the other creation that were all meant to simply be pointers to God. I start giving them a reality just as I have given my own false sense of I a reality. And when I start giving others besides God a reality the way I have given my own egoic self a reality, then I start drawing comparisons. Now when I start drawing comparisons, because my false sense of I has no reality and my mind is struggling to give it reality, I need to inflate it. I need to fight for survival and make sure that everything else that I am comparing it to is inferior to me and that I am better and superior to it. I want to get ahead of it because I'm thinking they're real and therefore they cannot get better than me, because the more real they become, the less real I become. I will vanish, I will die, I will become extinct essentially. This was the problem with shaitan as well. Shaitan initially was worshipping Allah. Allah did not create him evil. What happened with shaitan was when he heard that God has created another creation and is planning to appoint him as his Khalifa fil ard, as his representative and caliph on the earth, he immediately turned his attention away from God to Adam. Now he had an I. Once that I came in, so Adam became real and he became real, an independent reality. Once he became an independent reality and Adam became an independent reality, now he started drawing comparisons. Who is better? How could God make Adam the representative when I have been worshipping him for so many years? To which now Allah tells us in Surah Al-A'raf, chapter 7, verse 12, that when shaitan refuses to prostrate before Adam, Allah asks him, قَالَ مَا مَنَعَكَ أَلَّا تَسْجُدَ إِذْ أَمَرْتُكَ. He said to him, what prevented you from prostrating before Adam when I, your creator, commanded you to do so? You were supposed to have been in complete submission to me. I commanded you. إِذْ أَمَرْتُكَ. What did he reply? قَالَ أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِّنْهُ. He said, I am better than him, because now he's drawing comparisons. خَلَقْتَنِي مِن نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِن طِينٍ. You created me from fire, and you created him from mud. Where is the comparison? Where is the fairness, O Allah? You see, he's acknowledging that his creator is God, because he says, خَلَقْتَنِي, you created me. But he is still second-guessing God's wisdom and judgment. That I am fire, he is mud. How? How? On what basis is he better than me? أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِّنْهُ. Now, my main concern though is the verse that comes after. That when Allah causes him to fall, the cause of his fall is the I, the false pride, the egoic false sense of self. Because what does Allah say to him? He says, this is chapter 7 verse 13. قَالَ فَهْبِتْ مِنْهَا. He said to him, get down from it, meaning from paradise. فَمَا يَكُونُ لَكَ أَن تَتَكَبَّرَ فِيهَا فَخْرُجْ إِنَّكَ مِنَ السَّاغِرِينَ. It is not for you to be arrogant in it. Get out, you shall be one of those who are degraded. Now, a subtle point here for those who have an appreciation for the Arabic language. It would have sufficed for God to say, it is not for you to be arrogant. فَمَا يَكُونُ لَكَ أَن تَتَكَبَّرَ. But it doesn't say, فَمَا يَكُونُ لَكَ أَن تَتَكَبَّرَ. It says, فَمَا يَكُونُ لَكَ أَن تَتَكَبَّرَ فِيهَا. It is not for you to be arrogant in it. In it meaning what? In paradise. Which means you cannot be in paradise as long as there is pride and an egoic self. You see, if it would have said fihi, using the masculine suffix as a pronoun, then we could have argued and said maybe when God said it is not for you to be arrogant in it, the it could have been referring to God's command, to his amr. That God was saying it is not for you to be arrogant in it, meaning in my command, but it is fiha in the feminine. The ha refers to Jannah, which is a feminine noun. So it is not for you to be arrogant in it. What Allah is saying is not that you have hurt my feelings or demeaned or because you disobeyed my command, therefore my glory has been reduced. Because Allah is Ghafurur Rahim. He could have said, okay, shaitan is ignorant. I forgive you this time. But the next time I tell you, then prostrate to Adam. But no. He tells him, it is not for you to be arrogant here. Meaning, if we understand paradise as the ultimate place where one is in complete submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and there is absolutely no egoic self, then Allah is telling him, there is now an impossibility here. It is impossible for someone to be in the state in which he is in paradise and also have an egoic self of I that brings about false pride. And it is for this reason that we have a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam that says, whoever has an atom's weight of pride in his heart, he will not even get the scent of Jannah. You've heard this hadith, it is popular. My question is it possible for someone to have an egoic self and not have even an atom's weight of pride? If no is the answer, then that would mean the only way to get to paradise is to go in without that egoic false sense of self. It's very simple, 1 + 1. Here we distinguish, because I've had this question asked to me, that at the time of death, when that false sense of I collapses and vanishes, there is still a higher realm of spirituality where I acknowledge my Creator. So who is acknowledging the Creator if there is no I anymore? Now this is something that we have talked about in many previous series of lectures, the end of negative suffering, freeing the butterfly within, the difference between tabi'ah and fitra, and so on and so forth. But just very briefly, there is the real me that when it is conscious of God, it is aware of God as being my source and my origin on whom I depend, and it is able to watch the thoughts in my mind coming and going, and the rise of feelings and their drop within me. That is a part of the real me. That is the part that survives and remains posthumously. Then there is the false sense of I that I develop as an identity, as an independent identity from the time I'm a baby. Remember that whole example of the baby cries and the mother is not there to attend to the baby, and then it develops a sense initially when the baby is born, it thinks it is part of the world. When it's moving its fingers, it thinks the world is moving with it. It doesn't know it is an independent being. But then when there is conflict, the baby is crying, the mother is not there, it is hungry, it is not getting food, it slowly develops a sense of there is me and there is the rest of the world. And this world is a dangerous place and I need to fight for survival. And it creates this identity of I. When I'm completely identified with this I and I'm unconscious in the spiritual sense, that is when I'm not watching my thoughts. If somebody provokes me, I get angry, I get sad, I get depressed, I get upset, I get anxious, I worry, I fret, I get jealous. I'm completely asleep. I'm not rooted in the now. I'm not present. I'm not conscious of God. So there is a false I and there is a real I. What we are concerned about here is this false I that came into Shaitan, because of which he rebelled against God. And our concern is to break and shatter that false I, so that not that we think we no longer exist, but that we are constantly conscious of God and able to watch any thoughts and feelings that rise and fall within us. And we take our guidance constantly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why Allah says, that the faithful are those to whom when a group of shaitan visits them and afflicts them or inflicts them with sinful thought, طَائِفٌ مِّنَ الشَّيْطَانِ تَذَكَّرُوا فَإِذَا هُمْ مُبْصِرُونَ. They immediately realize that this is an attack from shaitan, that this is a thought that has come into my mind or my heart from shaitan. So they secure their hearts with this constant God consciousness. It is their taqwa that prevents them from falling into sin. It is important to distinguish these two. And as a side note here as well, something that I should mention as well based on a conversation I had with one of the brothers last night, that if you think about it as well, whilst I'm in this world, I see, I hear, I taste, I feel, right? I smell. All these senses are dependent on something physical. There are bones in my ears that allow me to hear. There's a piece of flesh in my mouth that allows me to taste, right? There is a jelly in the socket of my skull here that allows me to see with light and this and that. There is some gray mass in the skull, again, my brain, that is allowing me, but it is all chemical. Now, when I die, all this changes into dust. These physical organs go away. We might argue on the Day of Judgment, I'm resurrected with a physical body, so I have something similar. Now, that is a whole new subject. What kind of a body is that, and so on and so forth. But between these two worlds, there is alamul barzakh, isn't it? In alamul barzakh, I am a spirit, I am a soul. This soul can also hear, can also see, can also feel. It can feel pleasure or pain. It can taste, it can smell, it can rationalize, it can think, it can recognize others. What organs is it using? It is obviously using a higher extrasensory perception, a spiritual mind, that essence and part of me that remains and subsists when the physical body falls away. So when we talk of gaining higher levels of spirituality, awakening to higher awareness, transforming ourselves so that we are able to fathom and see some realities that others do not see, what we are essentially saying is, whilst we are in the body, we are trying to awaken these senses that would normally awaken after death. So when you now see these higher realities, you see them with eyes, but it's not these eyes actually. There are spiritual inner eyes that allow you to see it. You think with a spiritual heart. And that is another whole discussion, that the Quran keeps talking about understanding with the heart as opposed to the brain or the mind. I've alluded to this time and time again. In the interest of time, we go on here and we say that because we are so tightly integrated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the real me is aware of my connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I forget this when I fall asleep. That is why you will see that in the Quran, Allah connects these two and says that when you lose consciousness of God, you automatically lose consciousness of your real self. When you lose consciousness of Allah, you immediately lose consciousness of your real self, and you start living with your false sense of self. Look at how he explains this in a beautiful Surah Al-Hashr, chapter 59, verse 19. وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهِ. And do not be like those who forgot Allah, who forgot God. What happened then? فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ. So he made them forget their own selves. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. It is these who you will find committing transgressions on the earth. It is these that you will find constantly committing sin, because they are living with the false sense of self. Now, if my I that I have created with an illusion through conflict, that false I, had any reality, then rightfully what the verse should have said is, do not be like those who forgot Allah, so He forgot them. But that is not what the verse says. The verse says, do not be like those who forgot Allah, so He made them forget their own selves. That means these two are intricately connected. You cannot be conscious of God without being conscious of your true self. And you cannot be conscious of your true self without being conscious of God. The moment you forget your true self, you immediately forget God. The moment you forget God, you have forgotten your true self. If you want to be constantly conscious of God, you will have to constantly be conscious of your true self. And hence the hadith, مَنْ عَرَفَ نَفْسَ فَقَدْ عَرَفَ رَبَّهُ. Whoever recognizes and realizes his own true self, he has realized and known God. These two are intricately connected, and they cannot be separate from one another. When you see reality as being multiple realities and having their own independence and not being connected as one to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you now live with the ego. And because you're now separate and fighting for survival, you no longer see what harm you're causing when you waste water, or when you burn down trees, or when you harm another human being, or when you loot and kill and behead others. Because you're living in the ego. You will even use Quran and religion to justify your actions. But that is your egoic self that is doing it. When people say religion is the cause of violence, it is religion in the hands of the ego that is the cause of violence. Religion in the hands of submitted beings brings peace. It does not bring violence. And it is for this reason that mystics argue that multiplicity is hell. You will remember our brief tafsir of Surah Takathur. And that paradise is where there is unicity, where there is tawheed. And so we begin to get a glimpse as to why Islam is so adamant about tawheed, and why Islam is so opposed about shirk, that it sees shirk as being in a loss and a source of all the problems in the world, all the violence and all these things. The egoic self as well is a form of the manifestation of this shirk. Now, we said last night as well that even though, or the night before that even though we forget God and even though we are unconscious, because we are wired for Him and we are wired to seek Him, when we run after things other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in essence we are running after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We might run after wealth, we might run after beauty, we might run after status, we might run after position, we might run after power, we might run after whatever it is that we think will make us perfect. But in essence, we are seeking the beauty of Allah. We are seeking Al-Ghani, we are seeking Al-Jamil, we are seeking Al-Qadir, we are seeking Al-Aziz, and so on and so forth. It is for this reason that you will find that when the Quran speaks about people running after things other than God, it does not refer to these things as an illusion. It refers to them as a mirage. Why? Because a mirage is not something you're imagining. It is an optical illusion, but it is a reflection of something real. When you see water in a desert and you think that's an oasis, that mirage that you're looking at is not something that you're hallucinating. There actually is an oasis, but it is not there where you are looking for it. It is somewhere else. You are seeing a reflection of that. So what you're running after, what you're thirsty for, is real, but you're heading in the wrong direction for it. Now look at this verse of Quran, how beautiful it is. This is from Surah An-Nur, chapter 24, verse 39. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَعْمَالُهُمْ كَسَرَابٍ بِقِيعَةٍ. And as for those who are faithless, their actions, meaning their day-to-day pursuit and hankering for the world and running after position and power and beauty and wealth and all these things that you see them running after, is the example of a mirage in a desert. يَحْسَبُهُ الظَّمْآنُ مَاءً. The man who is thirsty thinks it is water. حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءَ لَمْ يَجِدْهُ شَيْئًا. Until he comes to it, the thirsty man, he finds that there is nothing there. وَوَجَدَ اللَّهَ عِنْدَهُ. Instead, he finds Allah is waiting for him there. فَوَقَاهُ اللَّهُ حِسَابَهُ. So Allah then pays him back for his account in full. وَاللَّهُ سَرِيعُ الْحِسَابِ. And Allah is swift in giving account. Do you see how beautiful this verse is? The thirsty man thinks there is water. He runs there. When he comes there, there is nothing. But Allah is waiting for him there. Now this is at the time of death, that he runs after this, runs after that, runs after that. And then when he is dying, he comes to realize that everything he was chasing was a mirage. And actually all there was that was worthy of chasing was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore mirage therefore has a very deep esoteric meaning here, that it is not just an illusion. We're not just running after things that are imaginary. We're running after Allah. But He is not where we are looking for Him. And that is why it is a mirage. And they find God waiting for him because at that point, at the time of death, the veils drop and they now see reality. Now, I wanted to speak about shirk as a historic phenomena as opposed to a reality. And I'll try and do this very briefly because of the lack of time. What the ulama and urafa say, that sometimes when we pitch these two together, we try and say tawheed and shirk, we think of these two on equal grounds as being reality. Actually, if you think about shirk, shirk was not natural to human beings. The human's original state, as we said yesterday, was to know knowledge through presence, directly. So the natural state of being is tawheed. Shirk was actually a historic phenomenon. What happened is that when human beings came to this earth and they no longer had the ability to see their Lord and their origin directly, initially some of the early enlightened beings who lost some consciousness but not fully, they perhaps had access to seeing higher beings like angels. And as they explained this to other human beings who conceptualized it, they made these angels into gods. And you will find that in the Quran as well, there is a reference to this of people who take angels to be God. With time, this was lost as well. Now the Quran also tells us that in Surah Al-Jinn, it tells us that after the coming of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the shayateen who are jinn were no longer given access to the heavens. The Mufassirun and the historians tell us that initially these devils had access all the way to the seventh heaven. And they were able to eavesdrop on the conversation of angels. And they would pass on this information to individuals who practiced witchcraft and magic and voodoo and so on. And people would go to these people and ask them for amulets and for solutions to their problems, to find things that are lost, to find things like this and that and so on. And these people would dabble in black art, and they would get help from these jinns who were eavesdropping from the angels. Now the Mufassirun say that when the Prophet Isa alayhi salam was sent, then these shayateen were now barred from going up to the seventh heaven, and they could only go to the fourth heaven. So now they had limited access to reality, and therefore these people who practiced these dark arts, they were now able to help or take money from people and suggest they had powers, but their powers were now diminished. Sometimes they were right, sometimes they were wrong. With the coming of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because now it was barred from them, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now they had absolutely no access to the angelic realm. So now there was no reality to what was being passed on as information. And these individuals now were relying on deceit and on cheating and on lying and on getting information that was largely false, which is the case now. And a lot of times now what happened is people now relied on legends and myths and superstitions and false ideas, and they made gods out of these. It's another vast subject that I'm obviously not doing justice to because I'm racing against time. Some people took gods based on what they were awed by. If they saw a large tree, if they saw a huge mountain, they began worshipping that. Some people were awed by natural phenomena, and they thought the gods were angry with them. And that is why you find that when you see something that is unnatural, you're asked to pray Salatul Ayat. Salatul Ayat is not just because you're frightened, like when there's an earthquake or a tsunami, but even when there is an eclipse, or even when there is a tornado or a hurricane or something that frightens you or takes your attention away, it is because you should not be awed by anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To restore that idea that everything is under the control of Allah, you pray Salatul Ayat. So some human beings were awed by this and they made gods out of that. Some human beings looked at what was precious to them and what was beneficial to them. If they relied on their animals, for example, then the cow became a god, or the elephant became a god, or if they were awed by the sun, then the sun or the moon or the stars became gods. And through this history, if you study the history of idolatry, if you study the history of shirk, you will see repeatedly again and again that shirk is actually a historic phenomena. It has no reality. Tawheed, on the other hand, is a reality. Why? Because after this world comes to an end and we come to Yawmul Qiyamah, Tawheed remains, but shirk does not remain. Even the one who denies God, even the polytheist, even the atheist, no longer denies the one and only reality. And this again then proves to us that shirk is a historic phenomenon, whereas Tawheed is a reality. If you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, I haven't completed what I wanted to discuss tonight, and I will pick up from here and continue tomorrow. But in summary, essentially what I will cover tomorrow very briefly to finish this subject before I talk about what I want to talk about tomorrow night, is that through these various historic phenomena, when human beings introduced shirk, with time as man acquired knowledge and science and progressed, he began to realize that all these things are myths and they are not true and they are lies and they are superstitions. But at the same time, because he associated these with religion and he looked for answers from religion, but religion opposed science and religion opposed philosophy and religion opposed metaphysics, and religion was not there to explain things as they rightfully are. Therefore, religion was thrown out with superstitions, with myths, with legends, and science became God. When science became God, man began to depend on only his thinking and his five senses. When he began depending on his thinking and five senses, he realized that these five senses sometimes deceive me. They are not always true. Because of that, he came to the conclusion that we can never be sure about anything, and therefore it is impossible to attain conviction and be absolutely convinced or know the truth in its full reality ever. And therefore human beings developed now a whole science. Today the leaders of education are considered to be the Western world. But if you look at the Western education system all the way to our universities, it is based on skepticism, on doubt, on the fact that because whatever you come up with, any theory you come up with can be challenged by someone else, therefore whatever truth you arrive at is simply a hypothesis. It is never true or a theory. And knowledge can only be something that is shareable. If it is something through faith or conviction, it falls under the realm of legends and myths and superstitions. And because human beings now made their basis of their life and their decision making and how they govern and their social rules and their education system and their entire perspective and worldview on cynicism, on doubt, on skepticism. And the human fitra, the human nature is constantly seeking conviction, seeking truth, seeking reality. These two oppositions is the cause of man's unhappiness, of man's anxiety, of man's restlessness, of man's living in such a chaotic world where he can't find peace and happiness. So we want to develop this a little bit tomorrow before offering a solution from Islam's perspective. If you look at some of the greatest scholars of Islam in spirituality, from a Sunni madhab or a Shia madhab, you will see their greatest preoccupation was How can I be certain that what I believe in is absolutely true? You look at, for example, Ghazali, who leaves society when he has a high position, people look up to him, he's the religious head and a dean of a university. He leaves society and goes wandering. What was his, he wrote a whole treatise as to why he left society and wandered. Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. His basic premise, we may disagree with his final conclusions and the truth he spoke about in its full extent. But his main concern was what? That I have all these beliefs. How do I know that what I believe is true? You look at Mullah Sadra. Mullah Sadra is, excommunicated from the main society. He goes and lives in a small village outside Qom for 25 years. No one knows where he is, what he is doing, until he re-emerges. And today people speak of him. What was his concern? If you read his writings and his spiritual striving, why did he think the only solution was through spiritual purification and transformation? Because this was his concern. How can I know truth with absolute conviction? And Islam to this day offers a solution, because Islam believes that it is in your nature to know the truth with absolute conviction, but to see the truth, not just rationalize it, because the mind will fall away at death. And this truth can only be found through spiritual practice. The men's today basis of education, of science, of research, of knowledge is on the premise of doubt, of skepticism, of cynicism. No one has the truth. No one can say his religion is right. You're not educated if you say the Quran is perfect. You are now basing yourself on faith and superstition if you say the Quran has no error. You're not mature in your thought if you say the Prophet is infallible. How can you say there is only one right path? Or you know the truth, right? So we think along those lines, that you have to be open to doubt, to cynicism. But therein lies the source of all man's anxiety and restlessness. And inshallah we will develop this a little bit and then offer a solution tomorrow night, inshallah, if you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight is our 9th night of Muharram. We wait the whole year for these days and nights to cry for Hussein, to pay our respects to the mother of Hussein. And before we know it, the year turns around and the days are upon us. It was just yesterday we began the first night of Muharram. And tomorrow night is the night of Ashura. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is now a guest for us for just two more days. From the day after, we will be crying for Zainab alayhi salam. And therefore we need to value what is left for us this night, tomorrow night, and the day of Ashura. And make these days memorable by showing our utmost respect and utmost grief for the household of the Prophet. Particularly on the night of Ashura and on the day of Ashura. To teach our children that on this night and on this day we do not laugh, we do not rejoice. When we greet each other as well, we do it with sorrow, with grief. We wish each other by saying, عَظَّمَ اللَّهُ أُجُورَنَا وَأُجُورَكُمْ بِمُصَابِنَا بِالْحُسَيْنِ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ. May Allah magnify your reward and our reward because of our suffering and our affliction over the loss of Hussein alayhi salam, over our Gharib Imam who kept calling out, هَلْ مِن نَاصِرٍ يَنْصُرُنَا. And tonight, my dear brothers and sisters, we are remembering the Shabih of Rasulullah, that son of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, Aliyun al-Akbar, who was so precious to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, that when someone asked Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam that, Yabna Rasulullah, whose musibah was the most difficult on Imam al-Hussein? Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam immediately said, he said, my brother Ali. More than his baby Aliyun al-Asghar, more than Abul Fadl al-Abbas. The greatest calamity for Hussein, the most difficult thing for Hussein was the loss of Ali al-Akbar. He was so precious to him. Why? Because he looked so much like the messenger of God that we are told in the books of Tariq that when people would come to Medina and they would ask in Medina that I never saw Rasulullah in my lifetime, what did my prophet look like? Describe him to me. They would point to Ali al-Akbar. They said, look at him, you have seen Rasulullah. This was Ali al-Akbar. When this qafila was coming towards Karbala, and he was the replica of Rasulullah, not just in his physical appearance. He was like Rasulullah in his character. He was like Rasulullah in his akhlaq, to the extent that his voice was like the voice of Rasulullah. When he spoke, it was as if Rasulullah. And I believe that Allah created him in particular for this reason, as itmamul hujjah, so that in Karbala, the people who fought Hussein would realize that they are fighting Rasulullah when they see Ali al-Akbar. Because even when someone is born and he absolutely resembles someone, he doesn't sound like him, he doesn't behave like him, he is an exact replica. When this qafila was coming to Karbala, Imam Hussein alayhi salam had a dream, had a vision, in which he heard a voice. Somebody was saying that this caravan is being driven towards death. This caravan is being driven towards martyrdom. In the morning, he shared this dream with his son Ali al-Akbar. He said, my son, I heard this in my dream. And Ali al-Akbar knows that the dream or the vision of an imam is always true. He asked only one thing to his father. This is how Hussein had raised him. He said, Ya abata, awalasna ala al-haq? Are we not on the right? Is not the truth with us? You can imagine how proud Imam al-Hussein was of this son. He said, Bala ya bunayya, indeed, the truth is with us. He said, Idhan la nubali. In that case, we do not care, my dear father, whether death pounces upon us or we pounce upon death. So when the morning of Ashura came, and it was the time of Salatul Fajr, Hussein alayhi salam told his son Ali al-Akbar, my son Ali, you give the adhan today. He wants the enemies as well to hear the adhan of Ali al-Akbar. So they hear the voice of Rasulullah. And I do not know how difficult it must have been for Zainab alayhi salam to hear that adhan. Zainab alayhi salam, according to some of the riwayat, she raised Ali al-Akbar like her own son. Because in some accounts, Ali al-Akbar's mother Layla was at Karbala, and according to some she was not there, and Zainab alayhi salam was her mother and raised him. Ali al-Akbar gave the adhan. The battle of Karbala began. When the Ashab and Ansar had all become shaheed, the Arbab of Azza say that whereas everyone asked Hussein for permission, Hussein alayhi salam himself asked his son to go to battle, because this was his sacrifice. And he himself said to him, O my son Ali, taqaddam ya bunayya, go forth, O my son. But then the same books say that after Hussein said to his son Ali, taqaddam ya bunayya, he says, ثُمَّ نَظَرَ إِلَيْهِ نَظَرَةً آيِسٍ. Then Hussein looked at his son with great despair. With great grief he looked at his son. He said to him, O my son, go bid farewell to your aunts first before you go for jihad. Ali al-Akbar came into the Khayyam. He began doing wida to his mother. He began doing wida to his aunts. He began doing wida to his sisters. Hamid ibn Muslim reports, Hamid ibn Muslim says, by Allah, when Ali al-Akbar left the Khayyam, it was like a janazah was leaving. Why? He said, because every time he tried to leave and the flap of the tent would open, someone would pull him back inside and the flap would fall again. All the women are mushtaq to do ziyarah of Rasulullah. Oh Ali, do not go, wait one more time, let us do your ziyarah and look at you. Ali al-Akbar came out. Hussein alayhi salam took a cloth, he tied an amama on the head of his son. He told his son, go my son for jihad. But Ali ibn al-Akbar got on his horse. He is about to leave. As he begins going to the Maidan, we are told Imam al-Hussein raised a finger to the heavens. He said, Allahumma shhud ala ha'ulah, faqad baraza ilayhim man kana ashbahu an-nas bi rasulika khulqan wa khalqan wa mantiqa, wa kunna idha ishtaqna li ziyarati rasulika nadharna ilayh. My Lord, bear witness against these people now. For the man, the young man who now goes to battle is one who resembles your Rasul. He looks like your Rasul, he speaks like your Rasul, his akhlaq is like your Rasul. My Lord, bear witness, when I yearned for the ziyarah of your Prophet and your Messenger, I used to look at this boy. Ali ibn al-Akbar comes into the Maidan. He begins to recite his rajz. He begins saying to them, Ana Ali ibn al-Husayn ibn Ali, Nahnu wa baytullahi awla bin nabi. تالله لا يحكم فينا ابن الدعي أضرب بالسيف أحامئا عبي ضربا غلاما هاشمي علوي. He says, come and fight with me if you dare. I am Ali, the son of Hussein, the son of Ali. I swear by the Kaaba, we are the household of the Prophet. This day I shall fight. We will not surrender and we will not pledge allegiance to the son of an unchaste woman. I will fight with this sword and defend my father, and you will see the strike and the fighting of a young man who is not just a Hashemite but an Alawite. Now the enemies come fighting with him one by one. Every one of them comes, they see the sword of the son of Ali. The Arbab of Azza say, in one time Ali ibn al-Akbar killed 120 of them. At one point Umar ibn Sa'ad sent one of his giants to go and fight Ali ibn al-Akbar. When Hussein saw this, he thought, my son is young, my son is thirsty, my son is hungry. He sent a message back to the tent. He said, tell the mother of Ali ibn al-Akbar to pray for her son now. Hussein raised his hand, my Lord, my son will finally give his life, but let him not be defeated by this giant or by this man who comes forth to fight him. Layla went into sujood and began praying to Allah. Ma'bud, Ya man radda Yusuf ila Yaqub, rudda ilayha waladi. O you who returned Yusuf to Yaqub, let my son come back to me once more. Ali ibn al-Akbar sent that man to the fire of hell as well. When he returned, he said to his father, Baba, did you see my jihad? Yes, my son Ali, marhaba, marhaba. Ali ibn al-Akbar then said to his father, he said, Baba, al-atash kad qatalani, wa thiqlu al-hadid kad ajhadani. Baba, hal shurbatun min al-ma? Baba, by Allah, thirst is killing me, and the weight of the sword is now weighing on me. Baba, if only I could get a sip of water. Baba, if there was some water, I would fight even further. But Hussein's heart was broken. This son never asked me anything in his life. When he finally asked me for something like water, I cannot give him. Hussein took his ring out. He gave Ali ibn al-Akbar the ring. He said, my son, place this ring on your mouth. It will give you some coolness. Go, my son. My grandfather, my Jad Rasulullah will now quench your thirst. Ali ibn al-Akbar got on his horse once more. Ali ibn al-Akbar bade farewell to Hussein for the last time. But when Ali ibn al-Akbar began going to the Maidan, as he went out towards the Maidan, suddenly he heard someone falling behind him. When he turned to look, his gharib father Hussein was running behind him. Hussein fell on the sands of Karbala. Ali ibn al-Akbar came down once more. Baba, you gave me permission to go yourself. Yes, my son Ali. Yes, my son Ali. Ay, my son Ali, I kash if you had been Sahib-e Awlad, you would have known how difficult this is for me. Go, my son Ali. But Ali, as you go out into the Maidan, keep turning and looking back towards me. I still want to do ziyarah of Rasulullah. Bas Ali ibn al-Akbar went into the Maidan. He kept turning back to look at his father. Hussein kept doing ziyarah of Rasulullah. Ali ibn al-Akbar kept fighting in the Maidan. A man named Murrah bin Munqidh stood up. He said, by Allah, may the sins of all the Arabs be on me if I do not grieve his father. He brought a spear and threw it towards Ali ibn al-Akbar. The Arbab of Azza said the spear came and hit Ali ibn al-Akbar on his chest. When Ali ibn al-Akbar pulled the spear out, the spear broke and the blade was left on his chest. Ali ibn al-Akbar in pain,
a man came from behind and struck him on the head. A fountain of blood erupted from the head of Hussein's son, Ali al-Akbar. As the blood began gushing from his forehead, he leaned forward on his horse. He put his arms around the neck of the horse. The blood of Ali al-Akbar covered the eyes of the horse. The horse ran towards the enemy, blinded with the blood of Ali al-Akbar. Now the Arbab of Azaz say, with him not able to see, the enemies came out with their swords. فَقَطَعُوهُ إِرْبًا إِرْبًا. They began hitting him with their swords from all sides. He fell down from his horse calling out, Alayka minni salam ya abata. Baba, my akhir salam. My akhir salam. The Rawi says, when Hussein stood up and Hussein was going towards Ali al-Akbar, he says sometimes Hussein was walking, sometimes Hussein was sitting down on the sand. Sometimes he stood up and walked, sometimes he sat down. He kept calling out, Ali, Ali, la'anallahu qawman qataluk, qatalallahu qawman qataluk. The Rawi did not understand. The Rawi did not understand. Hussein was not sitting down. Hussein was running towards his Ali. But every time he ran, he lost the strength in his legs and fell down on the sand. He began calling out, Ali, Abbas has broken my back. Abbas would break the back of Hussein. Ali had made Hussein blind. Hussein fell down on the hot sands of Karbala. Allama Majlisi says, when Hussein got to the body of Ali al-Akbar, Hussein saw three things. The first thing Hussein saw was that his son was struggling on the sands of Karbala. The second thing that Hussein saw was that Ali al-Akbar had his hand on his chest. He was hiding something. Allama Majlisi says, the third thing that Hussein saw was that Zainab had already gotten to Ali Akbar before him. Zainab was standing there crying, Wa walada, Wa Aliyah. Hussein said, Zainab, go back to the Khayyam. Zainab, go back to the Khayyam. Now the Arbab of Azaz say, the way Hussein cried for Ali al-Akbar, he did not cry for any Shaheed. Hamid ibn Muslim said, Hussein cried so loudly, the enemies were weeping at Hussein's cry. فَانْكَبَّ عَلَيْهِ. When Hussein went to every Shaheed, my dear brothers and sisters, Hussein placed the head of the Shaheed on his lap. But he says, when Hussein went to Ali al-Akbar, he threw himself on Ali al-Akbar. فَانْكَبَّ عَلَيْهِ فَوَضَعَ خَدَّهُ عَلَى خَدِّهِ. Then he placed one of his cheeks on the cheek of Ali al-Akbar. ثُمَّ بَكَى بُكَاءً شَدِيدًا. Then he began crying and he said, Bunayya, Bunayya, ad-dunya ba'daka al-afa. My son Ali, this world has lost all meaning to me after you. Hussein saw his son was holding his chest with his hand. Hussein said, what is wrong with you, Ali? He said, Baba, my chest is hurting. Hussein moved the hand of Ali al-Akbar. He saw the blade of the spear was still in the chest of Ali al-Akbar. Bas ajrukum ala Allah, ajrukum ala Allah. The Arbab of Azaz say, all the Anbiya were in Karbala, or the arwah of the Anbiya were there. I would say to the Anbiya now, oh Nuh, your son was rebellious, but you still cried for him. Oh Ibrahim, when you had to sacrifice your son, you tied a cloth on your eyes. Oh Yaqub, your Yusuf was alive, but you cried. Oh Anbiya, turn your faces away now. You will not be able to see this now. Hussein tried to remove the blade from the chest of Ali al-Akbar. Every time he lifted the blade, Akbar's chest lifted with Hussein. How should Gharib Hussein relieve the pain from his son? Ajrukum ala Allah. But Hussein put one of his knees on the hot sand of Karbala. He put the other knee and held Akbar down. He put his hand on the blade. He turned towards Najaf. Ya Ali Madad. When the blade came out from the chest of Ali al-Akbar, his ruh as well came out. Hussein sat down crying at the body of Ali al-Akbar. He began saying, Bunayya, laqad istarahta min hammi dunya wa ghammiha. My son Ali, you have now rested from the sorrows of this world. وَبَقِيَ أَبُوكَ فَرِيدًا وَحِيدًا. But you have left your father alone. Hussein has become gharib. Hussein tried lifting the body of Ali al-Akbar. He could not lift the body. He turned to the Khayyam. O children of Banu Hashim, Wallah la taqata li lihamliha. By Allah, I cannot lift this child anymore. Hussein brought the body of Ali al-Akbar to the Khayyam. Zainab came out and threw herself on Ali al-Akbar. Wa Aliya, wa Ghariba, wa Madluma. Mata mein Hussein. Ya Hussein.